Welcome. My name is Cindy Beth Johnson, and I'm the Vice President for Advancement at United Seminary. We have with us tonight alums, friends, new friends, donors, and students. I invite you as a way of being in community to drop your name in the chat if you're in the Zoom room and tell us where you're located so we can have a sense of who we are together. If after tonight, which is almost always the case, you want to hear more from Dr. Wheeler, I want you to know that we're having a book event on November 11th, which is Veterans Day, you have trouble remembering, over the lunch hour, and there's more information about that on our website. Our faculty favorite lecture series is a time when we invite our faculty to do what they do best, to offer their gifts of teaching and give us a glimpse of what happens in the classrooms at United. Our hope is that tonight you'll have a chance to see the breadth and wonder of the educational experience at United. It is now my privilege to call on Daryl Gillespie, who is the founder and senior pastor of Proverbs Christian Fellowship, the head of family ministry at Hope Academy in Minneapolis, and a current DMin student focusing on Black church leadership. Thank you, Daryl.
Thank you all again. I'm pretty sure y'all probably tired of hearing my voice. So because of that, we're gonna skip all the formalities of how brilliant our speaker is tonight from an academic standpoint. And let me give a personal testimony as I introduce our speaker tonight. I met our speaker tonight at a time when I was thoroughly frustrated with United. I was definitely ready to quit. I was tired. I just felt like this was not the place for me. And so I don't even remember how the conversation came about, but the conversation went a little bit like this. Just give us one more chance. I am getting ready to introduce a Black theology class, and I think you will enjoy it. I'm like, who is this little white man getting ready to tell me about Black theology? But you know how he fast talks us in an academic, intellectual way. So he told me he had studied with James Cone. Little did he know, I really didn't know a lot about James Cone, but I was acting like, okay, whatever. And so I said, I'll give it a chance. Boy, if I could tell you that my mind was blown. That class is the best class that I've ever taken in my life. And it was because our teacher knew how to minister to us individually and collectively at the same time. It was as if he was talking to me personally, but he was talking to the class. And if you talk to the classmates, all of them felt the same way. A person that, when I say they take time to study the lectures that are given, you can see that it's not just about the academics, it's about how do I help my students grow? And what happened was, if I could say this, I fell in love with his ability to teach me about myself. That's an extreme compliment coming from me, talking about a white man helping me learn how to do Black theology. And you've heard tonight over and over and over how open we are, how accepting we are, how we are able to have conversations about so many things. And one thing about our speaker, I think he loves making me deconstruct my theology. And I love letting him do it. So let's welcome Dr. Demian Wheeler as he comes to speak to us.
Wow, thank you, Daryl. I can't even begin to express how much your words mean to me. Thank you for that generous and kind and gracious introduction. Welcome to students and friends and alums, et cetera, here on Zoom as well. It's great to see all of you. I am honored, Cindy Beth, by this invitation. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming tonight. And I think I'm going to begin actually with a confession. And the confession is this. This is not really my favorite lecture. I have a very juicy lecture on the left Hegelians and another on Karl Barth and the rise of neo-orthodoxy. But lo, I am kind and merciful, so I will not subject you to any of that this evening. Instead, I want to talk about religious diversity. More specifically, the theological implications of religious diversity. The lecture I'm going to share tonight comes from a course called Religious and Theological Interpretation, which the majority of United students take in their first year of study. And one of the major questions we explore in this class, or at least my version of the class, is the question of religious diversity. In what ways do our encounters with the world's many religions, in all of their otherness and difference, affect how we interpret our own religion? Why are there so many religions? And how do they relate to one another? Can one's spirituality, religious identity, and deepest theological convictions be defined by more than one religion? So why did I choose this lecture? Well, the answer is very simple. Because diversity is in our DNA. Diversity is an essential feature and a core value of United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities. Indeed, this has always been the case. United was founded as an ecumenical seminary, a seminary that is open to the splendid diversity within Christianity. And as Art Merrill points out in his excellent book on the history of United, such ecumenism helped prepare the school, and I quote, for the impact of the emerging pluralism that was to mark the succeeding decades, end quote. United has really leaned into this emerging pluralism. We are a Christian seminary that is committed to interreligious engagement, by which I mean deep learning across religious borders and traditions. We are a Christian seminary that affirms radical inclusion and welcomes non-Christian students into our community. Buddhists and Baha'is, Wiccans and pagans, humanists and non-theists, multiple religious belongers, and those who identify as spiritual but not religious. We are a Christian seminary that has a partnership with the Islamic Seminary of America. We are a Christian seminary that recently established an endowed chair in world religions and intercultural studies. Many thanks to Andrea Johnson and David Fry for that immeasurable gift. Naturally, then, I want students at the very beginning of their seminary journey to grapple with religious diversity theologically. And the purpose of this lecture is to introduce students to the subfield within theology that explores the theological meaning and implications of religious diversity. And the name of that theological subfield is the Theology of Religions. Welcome to class. What is the Theology of Religions? Well, let me offer you a simple definition. The theology of religions can be defined as the effort to make theological sense of religious plurality, either from within the boundaries of one's own religion or from some broader philosophical perspective. The theology of religions emerged as a development in Christian theology. Christian theologians working in this subfield have sought to clarify the place of Christianity, the mission of the church, and the uniqueness of Jesus among the many religions of the world. Should we continue to view Christianity as the one true religion, or can there be many true religions? Do we need to believe that Christianity is the one and only way in order to be fully and wholeheartedly committed to it? Is it possible to maintain the conviction that Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior, while at the same time honoring the integrity and value of other religions? However, I want to point out that even though theologians of religions have been predominantly Christian theologians, the theology of religions can be understood more broadly as any attempt, Christian or otherwise, to make theological or religious sense of religious diversity. So when it's defined in this broader and more generic fashion, anyone can engage in the theology of religions, regardless of which religion she belongs to. A Jewish person, for example, is engaged in the theology of religions when she thinks about the meaning of Israel's election in light of the world's many religions. And a Vaishnava Hindu is engaged in the theology of religions when she tries to understand the relationship between Vishnu and the Buddha. So, if one is seeking to probe the meaning and implications of religious diversity, one is doing theology of religions. What does religious diversity teach us about the nature of religion and the nature of the divine? Are the different religions of the world different paths up the same mountain, or are they just different mountains? How do religious people make sense of the sheer fact that there are other religions out there, religions that thrive and orient the lives of human beings in meaningful, impressive, and compelling ways? Should the reality, persistence, and vitality of other religions alter the way we think about the meaning and mission of our own religion, whatever that happens to be? And how do we understand the truth claims of different religions in relation to the truth claims of our own religion? Right? These are the sorts of questions that a theology of religions sets out to answer. So, scholars who work within the theology of religions typically identify three basic models or theological approaches for understanding the meaning and significance of religious diversity. And those models are exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism. Now, I should tell you, there's been some pushback on this threefold typology in recent years, but I am one of those scholars who argues that this typology has not outlived its usefulness so long as we recognize that these models are multivalent, fluid, and sometimes even overlapping. In any event, as a way of orienting us to this conversation, I want to briefly discuss each of these models. So the first model is exclusivism. Very simply defined, exclusivism is the belief that truth, salvation, and divine revelation are found in only one religion. Differently put, exclusivism is the belief that one's own faith is exclusively, absolutely, and unsurpassably true and uniquely superior to all the other religions. It's the belief that my religion worships the one and only true God or gods and offers the one and only way to human fulfillment. For an exclusivist, affirming the absoluteness and finality of one's own religion means that other religions are false. That is, they need to be replaced by the one true faith. And adherents of these other religions are seen as unenlightened or unsaved or damned or lost or idolatrous. I think this cartoon here cuts right to the chase. But more seriously, although exclusivism is dismissed as intolerant or chauvinistic, exclusivists point out that seeing other religions as false is a necessary consequence of affirming that your religion is true. Islam and Buddhism cannot both be right about the nature of ultimate reality or the meaning of salvation. Maybe. This is why most of humanity's religions have strong exclusivistic tendencies. Okay, so here's just one example from the Dhammapada, one of Buddhism's sacred texts, and I quote, "Of all the paths, the Eightfold Path is the best. Of all the truths, the Four Noble Truths are the best. Of all things, passionlessness is the best. Of men, the Seeing One, the Buddha, is the best. This is the only path. There is none other for the purification of insight. Walking upon this path, you will make an end of suffering." Exclusivism has also been the predominant Christian response to other religions. Now, exclusivism is unfashionable within progressive religious contexts such as United, but I tend to agree with the theologian Daniel Strange, who suggests that historically, the dominant theme regarding Christian approaches to other religions has been an exclusive one. The Bible really does seem to have a strongly exclusivistic tenor, especially when testifying to the incomparability and uniqueness of Jesus Christ and the salvation that's offered in and through him. In Christianity, the exclusivist doctrines perhaps best encapsulated by the old Catholic dictum, extra ecclesiam nulla salus, right? Outside of the church, there is no salvation. But the Protestant reformers were also largely exclusivistic with respect to other religions. And most evangelical Christians today are exclusivists. That being said, even though most religions, including Christianity, have tended to make exclusivistic claims about themselves, there are elements within these traditions that seem to point in more inclusive directions. And for the last several decades, in response to our increasingly globalized world, many theologians have begun to explicitly draw on these elements, articulating a non-exclusivistic attitude toward the other religions. These theologians have moved away from exclusivism and toward inclusivism, which is the second major model in the theology of religions. Inclusivism is probably the most widely held view within mainline Protestantism today. It's also taken hold within Roman Catholicism and even within certain sectors of evangelicalism, for example, among some Pentecostal theologians like Amos Young. Very simply defined, inclusivism is the belief that divine truth and salvation are found in more than one religion. But only one religion mediates this divine truth and salvation in a complete or direct fashion. So my religion is the most direct path to God and salvation, but not necessarily the only way or the only path. My religion is normative and uniquely superior because the God that my religion worships and the salvation that my religion preaches are the true God and the true salvation. But other religions may have partial glimpses of what's fully revealed in my religion and imperfect access to my God and salvation. So my religion doesn't necessarily replace the other religions as much as it fulfills them. Okay, that's inclusivism in a nutshell. I think this diagram really illustrates the inclusivist position nicely. You say the one path to the summit, that's the best, and other paths are imperfect forms of this path. And to the extent that those paths display the virtues associated with the best path, to the extent that the other paths display virtues associated with the best path, right? So, as with exclusivism, inclusivism is present, I think, in most religions. In fact, some would argue that religions are, by their very nature, inclusivistic, in as much as they try to understand other religions from within the theological or the cosmological or the soteriological scheme of their own tradition. Okay? So, for example, consider the Jewish belief that non-Jews are related to Yahweh by virtue of God's universal covenant with Noah. Right? Or the Vaishnava Hindu belief that the Buddha is really the 9th avatar of the god Vishnu. Or the Islamic belief that Jews and Christians who submit to the will of the one God are really Muslims with a lowercase m. All of these examples are types of inclusivism, right? That is, they're attempting to positively account for other religions from within the perspective of their own religious narrative, their own salvation history, or their own conception of divine reality. What about Christianity? Well, many theologians point to a number of biblical passages that seem to reflect an inclusivist attitude toward people of other religions. So here's just one among many examples, and this one's from the book of Acts in the New Testament. So in Acts 17, Paul stands before the people of Athens, and he says the following. He says, Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, to an unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, This I proclaim to you. From one ancestor, he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth. And he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him. Though indeed, he is not far from each one of us. That could be seen as a kind of inclusivism. In the 2nd century, the Christian apologist Justin Martyr argued that the same divine logos who became flesh in Jesus also inspired Moses and Socrates. So, according to Justin, every human being possesses the natural gift of reason, or what he called seeds of the logos. Jesus, however, is the full revelation of the logos, right? The logos incarnate. As such, Jesus brings to fulfillment what had been partially known in classical philosophy and in the Hebrew scriptures. That's inclusivism. In the 20th century, the Catholic theologian Karl Rahner articulated an inclusivist attitude toward other religions. So Rahner firmly believed that Christianity is the absolute religion. For him, salvation is made available only in Jesus Christ, okay? And the church alone binds humanity to God. But Rahner insisted that God desires the salvation of all people, universally, without exception. And if that's true, then God must be at work everywhere in the world, seeking to draw all people to God's self. According to Rahner, and I think this was the boldness of his theology, he said, the non-Christian religions can prepare the way for the gospel and even be vehicles of salvation, right? That is to say, the means through which an individual accepts God's universal offer of grace. And Buddhists and Hindus and Muslims who do respond positively to God's grace, he said, infamously, are anonymous Christians. Right? Anonymous Christians. So for him, that's good news, because Christian missionaries do not have to automatically presume that all non-Christians are bound for hell if they haven't heard the gospel. Right? Some are unknowingly following Jesus. Now, you might not be surprised to learn that many Catholics and other Christian theologians have expressed reservations about Rahner's idea of anonymous Christians. Nonetheless, in 1965, during the Second Vatican Council, the Roman Catholic Church more or less adopted an inclusivist attitude in an extremely important document entitled Declaration on the Relationship of the Church to Non-Christian Religions, also known as Nostra Aetate. I strongly encourage you all to read this document. So on the one hand, the bishops of Vatican II vehemently maintain that salvation is only accomplished in Jesus Christ, right? Jesus Christ is the way and the truth and the life. On the other hand, they pronounced that Jesus is the savior of all humanity and that other religions contain much that is true and holy. Right? So only in Christ can people find the fullness of their religious life. But the other religions, they said, still reflect rays of truth. Right? So the bishops of Vatican II called on Catholics to dialogue and even collaborate with members of other religions and to honor the spiritual and moral truths found in their traditions. This was 1965. So last month, President Marshall noted that the church has yet to fully live into the promise of Nostra Aetate, and I could not agree more. Amen. I'm about to burst the bubble though, so be careful. So I agree, Molly. I think it's a trailblazing document. It's a galvanizing document, right? It's a bold and elegant expression, I think, of this inclusivist approach to religious diversity. And yet, for some theologians, inclusivism, though a step in the right direction, does not go far enough. So these theologians detect at least two problems with the inclusivist view. First, according to them, inclusivism is insufficiently pluralistic. At the end of the day, if you think about it, we could debate this if you want, exclusivism and inclusivism are essentially stronger and weaker versions of the same view. Namely, the view that one particular religion is final, unsurpassable, and therefore universally binding on humanity. So, for example, Christian inclusivists, no less than Christian exclusivists, declare that Christianity is the absolute religion and that salvation is accomplished only in Jesus Christ, right? So its critics charge rather harshly that inclusivism is just kinder and gentler exclusivism. It's still too restrictive, proclaiming the ultimate truth of its own religion and then interpreting the other faiths in light of its own parochial worldview. So Buddhism and Judaism and Islam are not true, good, saving, and holy in their own right, right? Rather, Christ is the criterion and the secret source of whatever is true, good, saving, and holy in them. And that leads to a second problem with inclusivism, which is that it fails to accept the other as other. Right? That is, in the process of squeezing the different religions into the worldview of their own religion, inclusivists transform religious others into something they are not. Anonymous Christians, for example, right? In short, they turn them into inferior versions of themselves. So, inclusivism, they say, these critics, it refuses to take the other religions seriously on their own terms, right? Assuming at the outset what is really going on in another faith. For some, there's something deeply patronizing and imperialistic about this. Right? Buddhists are not anonymous Christians. They're Buddhists. And Christians aren't anonymous Buddhists. They're Christians. So, in view of these perceived problems, a smaller handful of theologians defend yet a third theological approach to religious diversity, and this approach is known as pluralism. So, very simply defined, pluralism is the view that divine truth and salvation are potentially, though not necessarily, found in all of the world's religions, none of which is absolute, final, unsurpassable, or universally binding. So pluralists flatly refuse, whether by exclusion or by inclusion, to regard one religion as the only way, or the most direct or the best way. Rather, Christianity Islam, Buddhism, Judaism, and all the other religions are different, but equally authentic responses to the divine or ultimate reality. So, as this diagram shows, pluralists usually suggest that the world's many religions are different, but independently valid paths to the ultimate. So some of the leading pluralists of the last several decades include Gordon Kaufman, Wilfred Cantwell Smith, Marjorie Suhaki, Raymond Panikar, and my beloved teacher, Paul Knitter. However, I will focus my comments on an early pioneer of the pluralist position, and I'm talking about the philosopher of religion, John Hick. Okay, John Hick. So in an early book, Hick announced that pluralism represents a Copernican revolution in religion. Recall that Copernicus replaced a geocentric or an Earth-centered view of the known universe with a heliocentric view or a sun-centered view. Well, analogously, pluralists have replaced a Christocentric view or a Christ-centered view of the religious universe with a theocentric view, okay, or a God-centered view, right? That is to say, they assert that the center of the universe of faiths is not Christ or the church or Christianity, but God. Or to use the term Hick later coined, happily, the real. So exclusivists and inclusivists, according to Hick, view the religious universe with an outdated Ptolemaic map, right? They presuppose that religions revolve around one single faith, right? For example, Christianity, right? For pluralists, on the contrary, the religions revolve around a transcendent and unknowable divine reality, right? Not God the Son, S-O-N, but God the Son, S-U-N. Or to invoke in yet one other analogy that the pluralists like to use, they like to describe pluralism as a crossing of the theological Rubicon, right? That is to say, as a movement away from the myth of Christian absoluteness and Christian supremacy in both its exclusivist and inclusivist forms, and toward a pluralist recognition of the independent validity of other ways. So, the question is, why cross the theological Rubicon, right? Why embrace pluralism? Well, throughout his corpus, throughout his writings, John Hick gives at least 4 reasons. This is why he's a pluralist. And you can see how many of these you find convincing. First, ask yourself, why do we believe in the absoluteness, finality, or superiority of our particular religion? Well, usually, not always, but usually, it's not because we have evidence or rational reasons for doing so, right? Rather, we believe our religion is the true one because it's our religion, right? And as such, it just feels right and seems obvious to us. But if we grew up in another part of the world, or at a different time, or belong to a different family, or a different culture, or a different tradition, we would probably think and feel much differently. Second, Hick argues that no one religion produces better or worse human beings than any other religion. Right? He says that there's a rough moral parity between the different religions. Right? He's like, look, if Christianity was absolutely true, then Christians should be morally superior to Muslims, Confucians, and Buddhists. By their fruits ye shall know them. But the truth is that good and evil, virtue and vice are spread fairly evenly among the faiths. Again, no one religion produces better or worse human beings than any other, right? Christians are neither more nor less loving and compassionate than Hindus, Taoists, and humanists. Third, Hick claims that all of the religions lead to salvation or liberation. Of course, if we define salvation as being forgiven by God because of Jesus's atoning death on the cross, then obviously Christianity alone preaches the true source of salvation. But Hick asks, why should we define salvation so narrowly? Right? Why not define salvation more generically or more universally? For example, as a gradual transformation of self-centeredness to reality-centeredness, or God-centeredness, if you like that language. Right? So he says, look, if we define salvation in this broader way, it's not hard to see that salvation or liberation is taking place in all of the world's religions, not just one. Fourth and finally, and I think this is the big one for him anyway, the different religions view ultimate reality in various and even irreconcilable ways. Right? Some religions view ultimate reality as a personal God figure, right? Such as the Trinity or Yahweh. Other religions view ultimate reality as some sort of non-personal absolute. I don't like the term impersonal, but some sort of non-personal absolute. For example, nirvana or the Tao. So that leaves us with three options, according to pluralists like Hick. Right? We could say that the God or ultimate that's known within my religion is the one and only real God or ultimate, right? All the others are false. Or we could say that the other religions have partial glimpses of the one and only real God or ultimate, which is fully known in my religion. Or we can say that the God or ultimate known in my religion is one among many manifestations of the ultimate. The different gods and ultimates of the world's religions are different symbols or different metaphors or different masks of the same mysterious divine reality, he says. This is the option he chooses, John Hick, right? All of the world's religions are authentic human responses to the transcendent, to the sacred, to the real. Right? There are different but genuine ways of experiencing and relating to a mystery that transcends them all. Hick calls this the pluralistic hypothesis. Okay. So what's this a picture of here? Right, quack, quack, or thump, thump, right? Right, it could be correctly perceived as a duck or as a rabbit. And both are equally valid ways of seeing the image, right? Well, Hick says the same goes for the transcendent divine reality to which each of the religions is responding, right? None is more real or right than all of the others. Each faith is a different but equally authentic way of conceptualizing or experiencing the real. So, to help explain this pluralistic hypothesis, Hick looks to the Enlightenment philosopher Immanuel Kant. So, yeah, I know Clyde's excited about this part. So Kant famously argued that the human mind, okay, has a certain set of patterns. And these patterns organize and even shape the information that we receive from the world, right? The mind is active in the construction of reality, right? So for that reason, Kant said we only know things as they appear to us through the patterns of our own mind, right? We can never know things as they are in themselves, the Ding an sich, right? The thing in itself, right? We can never know the thing in itself, he says. Well, analogously, we can never know the real in itself, according to Hick. The real in itself is utterly mysterious, unknowable, and ineffable. Right? That is to say, beyond all images and concepts. Now, this is an important point. The real is real. Right? Hick is not a naturalist. He is not an atheist. But we only perceive and experience the real through the human and cultural patterns and symbols and images and masks that we inherit from our different religious traditions. So he says, look, the real is never directly known. It's never directly experienced. It's never directly worshiped. The real can only be known, experienced, and worshiped as one or more of its personae or impersonae, right? For example, as Christ or as Brahman. Right? This means, importantly, that we should never confuse our God and religious ultimate with the real in itself. I'll say that again because it's a key point. We should never confuse our God or religious ultimate with the real in itself. The real in itself, he boldly says, is not the Trinity or the universal Buddha nature. Right? Rather, the Trinity and the universal Buddha nature are two of the ways in which the real is humanly conceived, manifested, and experienced. And when we forget that distinction between our conceptions of God and God, this is what Western traditions refer to as idolatry. Okay. So, students and professors in progressive seminaries like United tend to be attracted to the pluralist model. I saw a lot of nodding heads in here. But pluralism has actually fallen on hard times within the field. A number of postmodern critics have emerged and pointed out a number of problems. So, to begin with, it's sometimes alleged that pluralism is ironically non-pluralistic. Think about it for a minute. Pluralism claims that the different religions are responding to the same religious ultimate and climbing up the same religious mountain. Brahman and the Trinity are simply different responses to or masks of the real. Right? And the kingdom of God and moksha are simply different ways of moving from self-centeredness to reality-centeredness. So the critique is this: pluralists tend to run roughshod over the deep and important differences between the religions, positing a singular reality beyond the diverse objects of religious devotion and some generic soteriological structure behind the diversity of salvations and liberations. Right? So there are many paths, but there's only one summit. So the critics ask, is that really pluralism? Moreover, some critics of the pluralist position believe that pluralism is really just a covert form of exclusivism or inclusivism. The irony about tolerant pluralism is that it's intolerant towards most forms of orthodox religious belief. And don't pluralists believe that pluralism is the truth? And if so, maybe pluralists are really exclusivists. Or perhaps pluralists are anonymous inclusivists. Religious practitioners, while intending to relate to Krishna or Jesus or the Tao, in actuality unknowingly worship a transcendent mystery that's explicitly available only to privileged academics like John Hick. Critics also point out, this is the one that really sticks in the craw, pluralism is no more neutral or no less tradition specific than the religions themselves. Far from being neutral, Hick betrays blatantly Western and blatantly modern assumptions. Like the religions themselves, pluralism is just a particular perspective, right? Specifically, a liberal Enlightenment perspective. And yet, pluralists often feign a global or bird's eye perspective. And worse, they impose this perspective on the rest of the religious world. And that's why pluralism is sometimes accused of imperialism. I once asked Paul Knitter, how did that feel when you first read that? He said, oh, it hurt. It hurt. Some claim that Hick and other pluralists impose their totalizing meta-theology on the religions of the world, pretending to omnisciently explain religion from above the actual religions, and refusing to take the actual religions seriously on their own terms. So the way Amy Upjohn Light puts it, she says, pluralism is like a meta position that purports to respect all of the world's religions, but in actuality contradicts them all. So the critics who level these sorts of critiques usually identify as particularists, okay? Because they strongly emphasize the stubbornly particular and distinctive nature of each faith. And I think probably the best expression of this position I've seen comes from Mark Hine. And he writes, there is too much particularity in the wisdom, truth, and human transformation in the differing religious paths, seamlessly woven into the concrete, unique textures of these traditions to ignore. It's not some abstract common truth behind the religion, some vague universal revelation that explains the tradition's power. It is the specific convictions the believer takes to define the nature of things, and the specific practices undertaken on those assumptions that are crucial, end quote. So what you find in the literature is you find these particularists claiming to be the real pluralists. They're really just inclusivists, but that's another conversation. They claim to be the real pluralists, right? That is, they honor the deep diversity of the world's religions, right? It's not different paths up the same mountain. We're just talking about different mountains. That's why Heim's book is called Salvations in the plural. Religions lead to different ends, right? All right. So that's typically where the lecture would end for TR 1001. But I'm going to end, I think, tonight by putting my own cards on the table, maybe as a way of generating a dialogue. So I think the particularists raise some valid and very important objections to the pluralist model. But I would say that the rumors of pluralism's demise have been greatly exaggerated. So in recent years, new and more pluralistic forms of pluralism have emerged. And the theologians who have developed these newer pluralist theologies, and these are just 4 examples: Perry Schmidt-Leukel, Kenneth Rose, John Thetamanol, and yours truly, have put forward, I think, some fresh arguments in favor of a pluralistic understanding of religious diversity, while also responding to some of these critiques. Right? So I'm going to conclude tonight's lecture by just very quickly highlighting a few of these newer arguments, or maybe newly emphasized arguments. There really is no new argument. So first, in my book, that's terrible, but in my book, I've argued that pluralism is not incompatible with particularism. Quite the contrary. Particularism is evidence of pluralism. The very fact that the religions are irreducibly particular and diverse is a good indication that none of them is truly absolute or unsurpassable. And I would further argue that it's a good indication that many of them register different but real aspects of ultimate reality. So maybe I'm a Trinitarian at the end of the day. There's one ultimate reality, plural aspects. Or maybe I'm a Sabellian. Secondly, is pluralism merely a modern Enlightenment project? Maybe it is in part, but is it only that, right? A fully pluralistic position didn't really become a live option in theology until the 19th century. But I think Perry Schmidt-Leukel, Kenneth Rose, and a few others point out that the seeds of a pluralist view are present in most religions. For example, many of the world's religions have mystical traditions that insist on the fundamental distinction between the utterly mysterious divine reality that is beyond all words and categories and the plural ways in which that divine reality is manifested to and conceptualized by human beings. Right? That's a staple of the pluralist view. Third, finally, and most excitingly, I think, pluralism can open up the possibility of comparative theology, right? And deep and transformative interreligious learning. If no single religion has the monopoly on truth and salvation, then why should we confine ourselves to our own tradition when doing theology? Must we not also look to traditions other than our own when pondering things like the nature of ultimate reality or the purpose of human existence? In his groundbreaking book, Circling the Elephant, John Thetamanol passionately contends that religious insularity is no longer an option. Religious insularity is no longer an option. We cannot truly love our neighbors as ourselves if we are not willing to listen to and learn from our neighbor's wisdom. And so I give Jonathan Tomo, my beloved teacher, the last word. He writes, we must circle, here it is right here. We must circle the elephant together if we are to understand each other, let alone the elephant. What if the calling of our time, a calling from the Holy herself, is to adventure and sojourn into new religious terrain, not now to convert or conquer, as Western Christians once did, but to humbly and hospitably receive other wisdoms. Mitigating the threat of planetary gloom will require cultivating a love for interreligious wisdom that will lead us forward into intimacy with unknown depths of the divine. Only as we learn other vocabularies and apprentice ourselves to other disciplines that also and otherwise mediate the mystery, will we more fully enter into the healing darkness where God dwells. End quote. Thank you, my friends.